Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Good afternoon, and welcome to WCAT Radio and this edition of Inter Vitam et Mortem, Between Life and Death, interviews and discussion with a Catholic bioethicist. I am your host, Dr. Marianne Urlakis. I'm classically trained and degreed in bioethics. Today I have with me a terrific guest. Jessica Archuleta is a monastic associate with the community of Byzantine Catholic monastics at Holy Resurrection Monastery in St. Nazianz, Wisconsin. Before we begin, let's start as we always do with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Dear God, our heavenly Creator, you are the author of life and of truth, the reality that you will each and every human person into being, created from the moment of conception, bearing the dignity and imprint of your own divine image and likeness within the very essence of our being, is a mystery beyond human understanding. Please help us to have a greater appreciation, the gift of being created in your image and likeness. Help us to reverence this reality, and this reality in our brothers and sisters, especially in the tiniest and most vulnerable among them. And help us to defend the sanctity of every human life from conception to natural death. We ask this through the intercession of Our Lady, the Blessed Virgin Mary, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Again, thank you for tuning into this episode of WCAT Radio, Inter Vitam et Mortem, Between Life and Death, discussion and interviews with a Catholic bioethicist. Today I have the joy of speaking with Jessica Archuleta. Jessica is a prolific writer. Her work continues to appear in Catholic publications, including Catholic Exchange. Jessica also has her own blog, Every Home a Monastery. And today I've invited Jessica on the show to focus in particular on the role of the domestic church, its role with bioethics, its role within the church, its role in family life. So with that, I am delighted to introduce Jessica. And hi, Jessica. Thanks for being on the show.
Hi, Marianne. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Could you tell the listeners of Inter Vitam et Mortem a bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, let's see. I am married. I've been married now for over 20 years. I'm a mother of 10 kids. I'm also a homeschooling mom. And like you said, I'm a monastic associate, which is like an oblate of Holy Resurrection Monastery. My husband and I both are. And we're Eastern Catholic, or Byzantine Catholic is the more common known name. And I'm a writer. Like you said, I have a blog, Every Home a Monastery. I also have a collaborative blog called Engage the Culture that I'm working on with one of the monks and a friend of the monastery. And I also work on other more creative writing type projects and things like that. So we met the monks. People usually want to know, how did you meet these monks, and what are you doing living in Wisconsin, because I'm originally from California. So we met the monks, I want to say I was 17, and my husband was, he was my husband at the time, he was 20, and we were Roman Catholic at the time. We were typical American kids. You know, we grew up watching MTV, not really interested in God very much, except for when you needed something, kind of thing, you know. We both grew up, like my husband grew up Catholic. I grew up in a non-denominational church when I went to church, but I was baptized Roman Catholic at the insistence of my grandfather. But my parents, after they baptized me, left the church and started going to a Protestant church. So I grew up with this really weird mix of religious beliefs because I had two sets of grandparents that were Catholic. So occasionally I would go to Mass with them, which I didn't like. I thought that it was just boring and dry, and my parents would tell me all these horrible things that Catholics weren't going to heaven and all, and all this stuff, and they worship Mary. So I had all these really weird ideas about Catholicism. But I also had the example, it was interesting, of the fact that my grandparents went to Mass every Sunday no matter what. One of my grandmothers prayed a lot. Like, she was always praying, always had a rosary. And in my household, we kind of went to church randomly. When I was old enough to stay home, I would ask, can I just stay home because I found church boring, and my parents would let me. So I had this very interesting religious upbringing, I guess is how I would put it. My husband grew up in a family that didn't go to church very often either. It was like, Easter and Christmas type Catholicism. So when we met, church wasn't at all a priority. And God was there for, when we needed something.
That emergency 911 number, right?
Exactly. When you were in a really bad state, you called on God. So that was where we were when we both met each other.
And I think that's where so many people are, so many folks, that is the American experience. What you're relating is the experience that I think most people have.
Yes, definitely.
So keep going.
Okay. So we met, and I ended up pregnant at 16, and I actually considered getting an abortion. And this is something my daughter knows. Sometimes people freak out like this. You know that? Yes, she does. I've discussed this with her at length. Because, I was 16 and freaked out, and I had, prior to that, I would have told you that I didn't believe in abortion. But suddenly I was pregnant and scared, and I had all these plans for going to school. I was in the middle of getting my private pilot license. I was going to go to college. My Manny had his own plans for college. And so we were in a panic. Thankfully
I've heard
I came to my senses.
from so many other folks too, Jessica, including on this program. You're not the first one to say that, so keep going.
Okay. I went into a panic and thankfully came to my senses. So Manny kind of was just like whatever whatever I wanted to do, because I think that's kind of the message that men get. Like, you don't have a right to say anything. Just support the woman, So that's what he did. But thankfully I didn't go through with that. So we had Scarlett. Let's see, and as soon as she was born, we went into even more of a panic because we're like, now we have a baby to raise. What are we going to do? And suddenly God became very important, and we started discussing how we were going to raise her. Manny wanted her baptized, and I was like, yeah, I want to baptize her. I was baptized, Well, Manny wanted her baptized Catholic, and I was like, I'm not baptizing her Catholic. What are you talking about? So then he starts explaining to me, well, you're Protestant. Protestants don't even baptize babies. What are you talking about? So we ended up having to go back and forth and had all these conversations about church. And Manny started going to church. He started going to daily Mass. And I started going to my parents' church. And I wasn't very happy there, so I thought, okay, well, I'll try some other churches. My brothers were going to Calvary Chapel, so I went with them to that. And nothing really felt like the right place for me. And the whole time I'm very annoyed because Manny's going to daily Mass, and I'm like, why does he insist on being Catholic? I'm not getting this, So we end up, he ends up one day just bringing me home a book. I wish I could remember the title right now. Basically, it was a convert book. And in this book, it was a bunch of converts explaining what their hang-ups were about the Catholic Church and the truth of the faith. So, they talked about stuff like worshiping Mary, for example, the Eucharist, explaining what the Mass was. So suddenly I understood, the Mass isn't supposed to be entertainment, which is what I grew up, you're supposed to enjoy the music, it's supposed to be entertaining. I realized there's supposed to be solemnity in the Mass, and it's supposed to be reverent, and I grew up hearing from my mom that actually when we would have communion every now and then at my church, which was just grape juice and crackers, she had that leftover Catholic belief that it really was Jesus, even though it obviously wasn't. So I kind of had that idea in my head anyway, but never really thought through it, never had anyone explain it to me. So suddenly I had all of this truth explained to me, And I was like, wow, this is amazing. So
how did that feel at that moment when you got to that point? Was it scary? Was it exciting? Was it overwhelming? Was it all of the above? How did that particular epiphany moment feel for you?
Oh, gosh. It was overwhelming.
Okay.
Exciting. And I guess I knew that I had peace, that I knew that I had found.
Okay.
In part, what I didn't even know I was looking for, if that makes sense.
Beautifully said.
So suddenly I tell Manny that, okay, we can baptize our daughter Catholic, and I want to return to the church too. So he was quite surprised by that sudden turnaround, but that's what we did. He hadn't been confirmed yet. We were both just baptized Catholic, so we both joined RCIA together and went through confirmation together. And during that time period, we were going to the Roman Catholic Church and learning everything we could about the faith. And this is when we met the monks at this early stage of our Catholic journey, I guess you could say. So we had a friend. We were taking, on top of RCIA, we were doing a Scott Hahn series. It was like something about the salvation history, and he started in the Old Testament and went all the way up through recent, current times, like explaining the sacraments. It was so good. So we went through classes doing that once a week, and that's when we met a couple, Bob and Esty. They invited us to go out to the monastery. The monastery was about an hour and 15 minutes away from where we lived. But it was closer to actually where I grew up, so I knew the area. And when you're in California, you're used to driving everywhere. So eventually after several invitations from them, we decided we'll go and check it out. At first we were like, is this even Catholic? What is this? What's a Byzantine Catholic? So really, Manny's like, I don't know. I think that has something to do with the Orthodox. They might be heretical. I don't even know if we can go there.
I have had so many people say that when they realize that I'm taking my family up to Holy Resurrection, or I'm out and about with the monks and invite them to dinners, pro-life dinners, relevant radio dinners. I have had so many folks stop us and say, are they really Catholic? Aren't you a heretic? No, this is good. Breathing with both lungs, Pope John Paul, okay?
Exactly. So, when next time that happens, you can think of me and be like, well, look, they even followed the monks all the way to Wisconsin. So it is a normal question that everyone asks. So Bob and Espy did a great job of convincing us that, no, they are Catholic. They kept telling everyone they pray for our Pope more than we ever do at a Roman Catholic Mass.
It's true.
So finally we went. And we fell in love with the liturgy.
And it's so easy to do. I am absolutely in love with the liturgy, too. It is.
Right.
It's incredible.
For me, it was, I've been reading and learning all this stuff about the Eucharist and what the Mass is, and all this wonderful stuff about liturgical stuff. And unfortunately, our local parish wasn't very reverent, would be the nice way to put it. And, I remember feeling really frustrated, like, wait a minute, if that's really the body and blood of Christ, then shouldn't, the service be a little different? Shouldn't it be, maybe a lot different? So when I went to the monastery, suddenly I saw, like, this feels like what worship should be like,
Right.
So we just fell in love with it. And, well, gosh, we started going to the monastery. It was about over an hour away, so we would go like maybe once every couple months, once a month.
You're in the same boat I am. I'm an hour and a half away from Holy Resurrection now. I love the Basilica of the Shrine of Mary Help of Christians at Holy Hill, and we are so tied to it. But yet, once a month, if I don't get up to Holy Resurrection, it's an hour and a half away. It's dragging everybody up there. But if we don't get there, I feel that there is something within me that is just lost, incomplete.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I know that feeling. I mean, that was what we went through, where it's like, we really, I mean, the Mass is the Mass, and the Eucharist is the Eucharist, and thankful to have had it at our local parish, certainly, but our soul needed what was at the monastery, I guess would be the way to put that. So, the once a month ended up turning into we're becoming Eastern Catholic, and Father Nicholas actually married Manny, and at that point we weren't married. We were going through RCIA. We needed to be confirmed first. So Father Nicholas married us, and he chrismated our daughter.
Father Nicholas is the abbot of Holy
Nicholas,
Resurrection.
Yeah.
For those who are listening, Father Abbot Nicholas Zacharias is the abbot there. So you were married by Father Abbot Nicholas.
Yes.
And that must have been, I've seen your wedding pictures, okay, and I'm so grateful that you've been sharing them through Every Home a Monastery. So beautiful. What an
Thank
experience.
you. Yeah, I've been going through the photo albums and finding all these old treasures that I'd kind of forgotten about, so I've been putting up there. The kids are laughing. They're like, look how young Father Nicholas is. Look how young you and Dad are, Mom. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, I'm at my 30th wedding anniversary this year too, and I've had kids ask me, my younger kids ask me whether we lived in black and white in those days or not. Yeah, it was before God invented color. Everything was in black and white, really.
It's so cute the way their minds think.
So you were married, and you have this
Yes.
child now. How old was Scarlett at that point?
She was 2, actually. She turned 2 the day before we were married.
Okay.
So we had a year-long RCIA that we went through, and then we planned the wedding, and we were married actually the day right before the fast started, because that was another thing, right? You can't get married during the fasting period. So, right. Scarlett actually turned 2 the day before our wedding. So her birthday has always eclipsed our anniversary, but that's okay.
Wow.
And then,
the Eastern lung takes that fasting period tremendously seriously. But we can talk about that later on. And there is such a beauty in having both the East and the West side by side. And for some, they are called to one tradition more than the other, but both are validly Catholic, and both are, I think about it, I love the way St. Pope John Paul the Great talked about it in terms of lungs. I've also often thought about it in terms of 2 chambers of the heart, that it's the blood of Christ that's flowing through both chambers. I was born with a PFO, patent foramen ovale. I have a hole in my heart, and the blood passes through back and forth. So for me, it's natural that East and West, that the blood of Christ is passing through both, in at least an analogy there, and that I am comfortable in both. But there is a definite beauty in both. So keep going. You're married. You've got a 2-year-old. You're loving life out there in California. Everything is vibrant. You're in touch with your faith. Things are clicking as they never had before. And then what happens?
Well, then what happened, actually, after we were married, we went through a bit of, I guess I would say, a dry spell in a way, because we couldn't get pregnant.
Okay.
We were trying for another baby now that we were married, and happily, thinking we're going to have a big Catholic family. And let's see, Diego and Scarlett are 7 years apart, so it's about 5 years of no baby coming. It was actually, the monks prayed for me to get pregnant. We went to different shrines. It was just years of waiting for that.
So that dignity of every human person, that dignity of life, God revealed that to your soul in a very special way by making you wait for this gift for so long and long for it.
Yes, I would definitely say yes. Definitely.
I went through 2.5, 3 years in between Kenny and Grace Marie, and it was the same. Lord, there are so many who don't want this gift, and I want this gift.
Right.
How come it's not happening?
Yes.
And I continue to get that, mine time, not your time, trust.
Right.
But it's so frustrating when you're going through it.
Yeah.
So, and I do
at
believe...
the time, I was volunteering at a pro-life center, and it was so hard seeing these women come in who wanted to go get an abortion,
Yes.
And here I was like, I just want to get pregnant so badly, So, yeah, it was just... when I look back on it now, I can see that it definitely helped me to have a certain level of detachment and really seeing my children as God's first, which I think has been very good for me as a mom to see that.
I had the same experience, and it is enlightening. It really is. It is so difficult at the moment.
Right.
But I was doing the same thing. I was in bioethics. I was on case consultations with women who wanted to abort. I was looking at women in contraceptive decisions that were in direct, opposition to the church, and trying to explain to them what they were doing. And as they did not want a child, I wanted one so badly. And yet it did help me to understand where they were, and what God was asking of me and asking of them, and just how every life is a gift from God.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting that we have the same experience. So finally, I did get pregnant, and it was interesting because this really was after I gave up in the sense of, like, I told God, okay, I accept this. I'm never having any more children. Well, I think that next month I was pregnant. So there's something to be learned in that, too, I think.
And I went through the same thing, both at one point after having several, lots of C-sections, and it not happening again after Gemma, hoping and praying that there would be another, and we began the work to adopt. And we wanted to adopt twins. Right away. We wanted that large Catholic family. And so we put in for twins from Guatemala. And we were waiting for the referral on twins, and it just wasn't happening. And we were told that there was a weight limit, and that the chance of getting twins that met the minimal threshold for weight was just non-existent. And so we accepted, okay, we'll hope for one then. Well, as soon as I put it in God's hands and said, yes, we will accept one, I was pregnant and anticipating a adopted child at the same time. They came a month apart.
Oh, wow.
Joey and George came a month apart, one on the international plan and the other through the old-fashioned way. So
that's something.
And then having them in a double stroller together, and my Joseph as blonde and light complected as can be, and my George looking as Guatemalan as can be, and having so many people come up to us and say, "Oh, they must be twins."
You must be like, yeah, obviously not.
Yeah, yeah.
That's great.
All right. So now you are pregnant again with Diego.
Yes, with Diego, and after he's born, actually, within less than 4 months, I was pregnant again with Magdalena. They're 14 months apart. So
I have several that way too. Grace Marie, Yvonne, and Gemma, same thing. It was, oh my goodness, how can this? Yes, they are 14 months apart.
Yeah. So now we have 10 kids total. So, let's see, Diego's 15, he'll be 16 in July. So, yeah, the last 16 years has been baby mode. So It's been interesting.
You have a beautiful family.
What was that?
You have a beautiful family. You really do.
Oh, thank you.
They are. You see the grace of God reflected in your family when you see you all together. You are just amazing to watch. You have a beautiful family.
Thank you.
So now you're there in California, and how did you go?
California.
Yeah.
And let's see. So, we're going to the monastery every week, and we're Eastern Catholic. The monks have baptized and chrismated all of the kids. Now, Manny and I actually moved away for a few years to New Mexico because we wanted to be by his family, and we also kind of felt like we wanted more of a parish community and to be closer to a church and closer to his family. We thought maybe it'd be good for the kids, and there was that kind of stuff going on. So we actually moved for a few years. That didn't work out. We moved back to California, and really a lot of it was, it was job stuff, and it was also not settling into a church community in New Mexico as much as we loved the state, and we enjoyed being by his family. So we went back, and at this point the monks have sold their property, and they were, or shortly afterwards, they sold their property, and they were going to try to buy a monastery that was better suited to them, that was already had buildings, cells built, because the monastery was just very, very humble. The chapel was a converted garage. The monks lived in converted trailers that were like from the army that used to be bathrooms. So they didn't have proper cells built for new guys to come in. So they were really kind of stagnant. They weren't growing. So they needed to get a new facility. So they ended up staying in as guests at a Benedictine monastery out in Vallejo, California. And that was an hour from where we lived because we moved back home to our same place. And us and the other community members that would go, we all just drove out the other direction. Now we would go to the monastery there. So that was about 3 years there. And then finally the monastery decided they couldn't find a place out in California because California is so expensive. They were just paying out outrageous prices. So they found a place out in Wisconsin. They purchased that. They moved out here. And at that point, we were kind of set that, our little extended community, all the other families, we would all attend one of the local parishes together, one of the Eastern churches together. And we did that for a year. But we still had the issue of California being so expensive, and we had a large family at this point. We really couldn't stay. We really couldn't stay in California. So the thought was, well, if we're going to move, maybe we'll try the Midwest. It's not as it should be, supposedly supposed to be cheaper, cost of living wise, and the monastery is already there. We don't need to create a new community, which we'd already tried that, so we really knew we didn't want to do that again. So a year after the monks moved, we followed them, and we've been here now for about 6 years.
Wow.
And since then, I've had 3 more kids. I have 3 Wisconsinites.
I got to know the monks right after they got here. I think it was probably within 6 months after they arrived.
Okay.
I discovered them, or they discovered me. I don't know how that worked.
Yeah.
But we discovered each other. And one of those God linkages. And,
right, yeah.
And then got to know you through them almost immediately. So your domestic church has developed really within the embrace of their monastery from the beginning.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
That is really a beautiful relationship. And tell me more about the moving here shortly after they arrived here. How did that help your family spirituality develop?
Well, we, as far as church-wise and church services, we even though they were an hour away from where we were before, we we just made the drive before. For example, during Lent, we have pre-sanctified liturgy during the week on Wednesdays and Fridays. We would just pile everyone in the car and go. So now I don't have to do that. I can just pile everyone in the car still, but we just go up the road. It's still all the work of getting them ready and out the door. You know what that's like, but
right.
It's just up the street now. So as far as church services and what have you goes, before we made that sacrifice and we made the drive and we did it anyway. Now it's easier for Manny because now he can go to Matins, for example, or go to Vespers in the evening. He's off work sometimes, or there's Saturday liturgy that we can attend, where in the past maybe we would only do that every great now and then. So we can go to church more often, a little bit more often. We did go before, I guess is my point. And we still have a big family and all of the normal restrictions of, I don't want to say restrictions, but responsibilities of having kids to raise and what have you. So it's convenient. It's certainly a lot more convenient that the monastery is up the street. Like Lent, for example, or Holy Week, we spend, before my husband used to just take the week off of work, and we would drive out to the monastery for the day and be there all day and all night, and we would go to the services and help decorate the church and help prepare food and all of that stuff. So now it's a lot more convenient because we're close by. As far as, I think really it's been more of a struggle in some ways because we're removed from our friends, we're removed from our family.
Sure.
And it's kind of been a little bit of a desert in some ways. No, not in some ways. I would definitely say it's been a desert in a lot of ways for all of us, for the kids too.
Anyone who has lived through a Wisconsin winter, including this one, there is a definite desert element to it, and there is isolation.
Yes.
Even
which was
if
so new for us.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah.
When you look at how far you've come in these years of marriage, from being essentially unchurched and could you have ever imagined this at 15, 16, that you would have this relationship? and when you see that, you realize how completely God-driven it is, that when you put yourself in the palm of his hand, this is where he planted you and why, and that element of trust. And that on this show has been a continual theme from, Vicki Thorne, almost every guest that I've interviewed, Father Jacob Boddicker, Monk Shorsha, so many of them have talked about this is not where I planned on being if I would have closed my eyes and looked at my life at 15, but it is not a free fall into God's hands. It is not for those who are contemplating that act of the will and trusting. It is really not. He has you. He really does. He just wants your permission to make the great plans he has for you known.
I think it's important that. I'm sorry. I thought you were.
No, keep going. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, I think it is important, as I was just talking about this sort of a bit of going through this desert period since being here, I think it's actually, it's those times that draws us really close to God, those really painful, difficult, lonely times. And those are also very critical times because those are times where we can say, maybe I was wrong. Maybe this isn't what God wanted of me.
Right.
And it's so important to just really really trust God and to see, I can look back and say, this had to have been God. I would not have brought myself here. I wouldn't have chosen this, or to see all the doors that he opened, for us, certainly, the doors that he opened to allow us to even get here. When we first talked about moving here, we were thinking maybe within 5 years. We didn't expect all of these things that fell into place so quickly that allowed us to come within a year. And the same thing for buying a house here. I've written about that on my blog, how, someone gave the monks a house, and we purchased it from them, and everything just really fell into place where it has to be God, and those things help me to stay focused when things are difficult. Because
and when you
certainly
look at
following
those
God's
types,
will is going to be difficult. Like it just is. That's part of the deal, you know.
when you look at those things, you realize that they were not things that you could have even asked for or verbalized in petition one by one, that just by trusting, he gave you so much more than you would have ever asked for. I look at those painful times in my own life, and I look at things that I asked him for specifically, and I wanted with my will, and I've come to realize that if I would when I step back and let God be God, far greater things happen. Remember when my dad was first diagnosed with cancer, kneeling by his bed, crying my eyes out and saying, just 5 years, all I want is 5 years. Can you give me 5 years? We got 5 years almost to the day.
Oh, wow.
And I, after that, thought, maybe I should have just said, could he just be here for a while instead of putting a limit on it and saying 5 years? There have been so many times that if I push for what I want and am very specific, God gives it to me. And then I stand back and I think, wow, if I would have just trusted you, how much greater what you had in mind for me would have been. So it is beautiful to see his hand and to look back and to have your kids see that too. How has your journey in the domestic church inspired your children? How do you see that come alive in their lives and in their eyes and in their faith?
It's interesting because for my kids, this is just normal life. The monks are just normal people. They're very, it's funny because we've been going through pictures, like I mentioned, and we've been putting stuff up on the mantle, and we've got pictures of our grandparents and wedding pictures, and we have pictures of the monks up there with friends and what have you, and one of my daughters commented, she's like, people probably think we're weird that we have pictures of the monks up on the mantle, but reality is, like, those are the people that they're close to. They don't, especially now that we're in Wisconsin, they don't really see their uncles or their aunts or extended family members. That's just normal life for them. Which I think is really good. Like, I love that they don't think anything strange of somebody being a monk or a priest or a nun. They think it's strange if people don't know what a monk is, I have to remind them sometimes, like, your experience isn't what most people have, like when they meet new friends and what have you, their friends are always like, what do you mean you go to a monastery? What is that, So how it affects them, I can certainly see from myself, my own childhood, and I see them, and they're just growing up so much more, in so much more of a wholesome environment. They have such a blessed childhood. They really do, and I'm so grateful to have been able to give that to them. But it's just normal life to them, which I think is how it probably should be, that, the Christian life, I think that's what we want, right? We want the Christian life to not be something bizarre or out of the ordinary, but normal life for our kids, if that makes sense. I don't know.
It does. That has been my experience, too. It's been the same thing that I've had here, and my kids have grown up with friars, now monks as well. Two of the young ladies who used to come and help with homeschooling have entered convents. One is a missionary of charity, one of Mother Teresa's sisters, and the other is a Schoenstatt sister. One of my daughter's closest friends is a cloistered Carmelite sister at the cloistered Carmelite convent in Denmark, Wisconsin, and she's been there now for 4 years. And for my kids to have grown up where this vocation was a normal vocation, along with the married life, along with the generous single life, there has been the vocation for religious life right there side by side. And it has been very beautiful. I look at my kids and I see the innocence that they have grown up with, the beauty, the goodness, truth, and beauty, those transcendentals that we want them to see, and how it's just been interwoven, and what a gift from God it is. I thank God every single day for that gift, for what it does to them spiritually, intellectually, and just in their human development. But like you, I also have to remind them when they meet other people that, this is not necessarily a part of everybody else's life, as sad as that is. You have a treasure here, you have a gift. And your gift might be a little overwhelming for other people to understand. So,
exactly.
When you're in a class someplace else and you raise your hand and it looks like everyone's looking at you like you're from outer space, you're not imagining that feeling. They are looking at you like you're from outer space, okay? Take a deep breath and go forward.
It's kind of, have you with your kids, I try to not stress to my kids in the sense that I want them to feel, stressed by it, but I do try to make them understand that because they have this gift, they also have a level of responsibility for it. And not that I mean they all need to go become monks and nuns, but they do need to understand it and value it. And certainly, I encourage them all, whatever they're going to do, if they're going to get married, or if they're going to become a monk, a nun, or a priest, or a deacon, to always know that they have this beautiful gift and they need to share it with people. I'm sure that you've probably maybe expressed the same kind of thing to your kids.
I have, and I agree with you, Jessica. I've often said to them, to those who much has been given, much will be required. And you guys are required to share this. When you look around you and you see in, the classes that you've taken in the secular world, ballet, taekwondo, all the other things that you've done in your secular world, and you realize that none of these families are like yours, that you have the responsibility to be there and to share this with others. And like you, I am thrilled. I want whatever God wants for my kids. And I've told them, you will not be happy unless you do what God is asking you to do. From early on, I'd never asked the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? I've said, what does God want you to be? Because you won't be happy unless you choose well and choose wisely what God wants you to be. That doesn't mean that I'm expecting everybody to become a priest or nun. I've been open to that possibility. From the time they were very teeny, we had a costume bin, and along with the costumes for doctor, nurse, everything else that was in there, there was a kit that was reserved for the boys that was a mass kit, and there were vestments, and there was a Carmelite habit and a Franciscan and a Benedictine, and the girls had habits in their costume bin as well, and if they wanted to try it on and see what it was like, they could, but they weren't pushed toward it. It was one of the many things that are out there. They've also been told that there are some professions and some vocations that are just simply not open to us as Catholics. And that as time goes on, that's going to be increasingly true, that there are certain things that because of our belief in the dignity of every human person and the sanctity of life, there are certain vocations, certain professions that the door is closed on. And
that's an important conversation we have to have with our kids more and more these days.
I think so. I do. It's a painful conversation, but that there are certain things that are incongruous with our life as Catholics, and eternity is far more important than a profession now. So as you're choosing as you're listening to God's call for you, know this as you're looking for a profession and as you're looking for a spouse. Because if you believe that God has called you to the vocation of marriage, then if your future spouse has chosen a profession that is incongruous, say an abortion physician or an abortion nurse, if your future, the one that you're falling in love with, has chosen something that is completely antithetical to your faith, then you've got to take a step back and make some serious choices and discern this with God before it goes too far. And those are conversations I never envisioned that I would be having with my children. But I think as Catholic parents, they're conversations that are necessary. When we talk about how our domestic church plays into ethics and bioethics, that is where, as homeschooling parents in particular, I think it does.
Absolutely.
There are conversations that we're having with kids that our parents never had to have, but they're not going to get these conversations anyplace else.
Right, yeah. No,
so when we talk about that responsibility, it's there. As you know, WCAT Radio is part of Holy Apostles College and Seminary, and through two, soon to be three of my children are Holy Apostles students. It's been a phenomenal program, and there are young men in seminary who are part of the Holy Apostles community. They're discerners. As you look at, and so I ask all my guests on WCAT on Inter Vitam et Mortem, what advice do you have for those who are discerning, or for those who are already in seminary or in religious life, or they're formators? And you can look back at everything you've been telling me from your time in California. What could a clergy member have done to help you in your journey, or even now for your children? What piece of advice would you give them?
Well, I would say what stuck out to me and Manny the most, which has really shaped the way that we have lived out our vocation and raised our children, would be Father Nicholas, Abbot Nicholas. He had very early on made the statement that every man was called and every woman was called to be a monk or a nun. And what he meant by that was the answer to that was really what is written in my blog, Every Home a Monastery. That's why we have that name. But what he meant by that, of course, was that everyone is called to holiness. It doesn't matter what your vocation is. It doesn't matter if you're a priest, if you're a monk, a nun, a layperson. Everyone is called to give their life to Christ completely and to serve Him and serve the Church. I think keeping that in mind is vital as Christians. We can get very distracted, I think, sometimes in our vocations, and we can get very distracted with the details of it and lose sight of loving God and serving God and seeking after Him and serving the Church. And certainly if you're married, that begins with your children and your spouse and your community. So that's certainly what I tell my children, and that would be what I would say to anybody is, keep in mind that no matter what you're doing, you're called to love God above all things and called to serve others. And your vocation is how you go about doing that.
Right.
Sometimes people can get very distracted with, having a large family, with homeschooling, or if you're a priest, you can get sort of caught up in the importance of the priest's role. And, we need to really stay focused at whatever we're. I'm sorry, I think someone's calling my other line. Whatever we're doing, we're supposed to be serving God. It doesn't matter what your vocation is. The priesthood, certainly, Father Nicholas loves to remind people, the ministerial priesthood is there to serve the royal priesthood of all believers.
Beautifully stated.
What's that?
beautifully stated. I love the way the way you phrase that. In terms of God first. What everyone is called. I love Father Nicholas's statement has hit me too, and he's not the first one who had said it in our lives. That everyone is called to that domestic church, you are a part of a royal priesthood, and to live that out. And if you're called to the ministerial priesthood, discern that call and follow it. You will not be happy unless you are following God's call for you. One of the things that struck me about the monks, reason I fell in love with them in Holy Resurrection immediately, same phenomena that I felt with the Carmelites at Holy Hill, and so many other places. Assisi, when we visited Assisi over the past couple of years, is the authenticity. When you look at the life, authentically Catholic people, authentically Catholic believers, authentic believers, people who are truly living the life in Christ. When you see that, children pick that up immediately. They know when they're being snowed and when they're not.
Right.
And they do. They see right through it.
They do.
And they gravitate toward that which is authentic, and so do we. There's that goodness, truth, and beauty that are pulling us and directing us. And in your family, you see that, even from a distance, from a observer looking at you from the refectory at Holy Resurrection, as kids are running all over the place, and there's Abuna Moses Parrot, and there's authentic love, but there is authentic love and joy there, and in the middle of that authentic love and joy is God. It's Christ-centered. It's absolutely there, with His beloved Mother watching right there too. Jessica, we are at the end of an hour.
Okay.
So thank you so much for being a guest on this show, WCAT Inter Vitam et Mortem. I invite my listeners to please also go check out Jessica Archuleta's blog, Every Home Monastery. She is a gifted writer, and I hope you'll see more of her work in the future, because she's got a beautiful story to tell, and she's doing great things with the domestic church. So thank you so much for spending so much time with me and sharing your story here.
Well, thank you.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.